What's up, everyone? So excited that you all are able to just come back in here just briefly, but to just discuss a couple of things. It's going to just be in regards to Keyshawn Davis and everything that's been going on around just the behaviors that we've observed. This will look a little different. As you know, I'm always going to come from that clinical perspective. But before I actually look at this entire incident through a different lens, I intentionally want to give myself space, right, to look at it through the lens of a boxing fan. That part of me that was just so excited to see him fight on that night. The build up, we've been waiting for some time. And so I'm going to go from that lens first. So what I observed from Keyshawn Davis, also known as Key, also known as an intricate part of DB3, right? Was a crash out. Literally, that's the first thing that came to my mind. That's what I saw, as I was watching the presser, as I was just, watching the weigh-in and all of the other antics that all of us observed, right? I just thought of crash out. Because all of these things, y'all, took place outside of the ring. The behavior that we observed in the presser, the interaction that we actually saw with Abdullah, right? The interaction that we saw with just other boxers that his brother was about to fight. I mean, it was just off, if you will. And I was disappointed, right? Because it was like, man, what are we doing? What's happening here? Because it was that cost. And you've heard me speak about that cost a lot. When people make these decisions, have they even considered what the cost truly could be? I'm not speaking of merely the common definition of cost, and that's typically regarding monetary value, right? But I'm actually talking about one's integrity, right? Respect for your fans, respect for those around you. And that's the cost that I saw that was at stake from the presser all the way through the end of the fight, right? All right. So I'm going to, now that I've given myself space, right? Because I always tell y'all, give yourself that space to feel that thing. Allow yourselves to feel that. Now that I have validated just how I feel as Cam, as a boxing fan, now I'm going to take that hat off for a moment. I'm going to set that part of myself to the side for that moment. Right now, I'm going to come strictly from the lens of that clinical perspective, that clinician perspective. So, you read on the description that it's about the unseen, the unheard, and the unspoken, right? Let's go through this thing. Let's start with the unseen, right? So, what came to me is, was it possible that something may have occurred prior to the presser? And I'm not talking about actual interactions and communication with other individuals. I'm saying possibly within Keyshawn. Did something start to come unraveled, if you will? Did he start to feel a little off kilter, if you will? I say that because I recall, and I'm only paraphrasing, it's not like I'm saying this is what he said verbatim, but I recall two instances where he was speaking at the presser, and he kept referring to, he was saying how, you got to keep defending and defending your belt and defending it. I don't know if anybody heard that part. And then it was only moments later that he went back to, well, when you're the world champion, you got this thing that you just carrying. And of course, that clinical side is saying, was there a lot of pressure? I don't know if any of you have ever dealt with that pressure. Now, at times, we can experience pressure and we are able to say, oh man, I have a lot on me right now. And we are able to still keep ourselves pretty balanced. Even if we become off kilter, even if we may have moments where we unraveled or emotions are a bit intense or overwhelming, we're able to bring ourselves back to a state of stability. Now, what happens if we aren't? All right, so we just talked about just some of the things that you really couldn't see it, but you were hearing it. I heard it specifically. I want to be very intentional. It was what I heard, right? It was a lot of focus on what seemed to be the pressure. You're in your hometown. There's a lot of expectations. Of course, it's a lot of support, but that also comes with expectations, right? So then I was thinking, and I said, I want to see how he was in a previous presser, right? I just want to see how he was, right? Because I was thinking, I want to see if I'm able to compare the Keyshawn that we just saw to the one who was most recent. Because it's also with some stressors around that situation, if you remember, with some racist things that took place as well in that one, because there's been a lot of racist things going on in boxing, period. But it was a stressor. So it was a good moment for me to be able to compare the Keyshawn that we just saw days ago to the Keyshawn that presented at that most recent fight. So then we get down here, right? And we go to the unheard, right? The unheard. When I think of unheard clinically, it's when I'm intentionally, although I may be making great eye contact with an individual that I'm serving and assessing, I am also able to look at the person holistically, meaning that I am paying attention to their eye contact. I am paying attention to any body movement, leg bouncing, anything that may insinuate possible anxiety. I'm listening to the speech, the rate, fluency, all of those things, right? And so I went back and I first watched the most recent presser again. And I'm looking at him just randomly shouting remarks out. You got people up there talking and he's just hollering all across. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, what's happening? Not then, not when I was in the moment and looking through the lens as a boxing fan, right? Not then when I was in that part of me that just wanted to see a good fight and was all excited about leading up to the fight, right? The whole build up, all of the things. No, but now looking at it from that clinical perspective, I'm like, okay. So something was happening then, right? That tells me something was already happening. And that's just like I said, because I am trained to look holistically. Within minutes, I'm looking at everything, right? And so I'm watching him just shouting out all across, other people talking. I'm looking at the interaction between him and Abdullah. Abdullah's over here, calm, just being himself, because I truly believe, don't know the kid, but I truly believe that is his baseline. That is really who he is. Okay. And then I'm looking at Keyshawn, and I'm watching the body movements. I'm listening to the pressured speech, how rapidly he was speaking, just the overall rate, the tone. And like I said, it was quite loud and pressured, which definitely signifies some other concerns. Here, it wouldn't even be it wouldn't be important. I mean, it's one thing if I'm working with someone in person. This is just me looking at my TV and breaking down different observed behaviors, if you will. So I'm noticing all of that. Well, then I was like, all right, I'm going to stop right here at this presser. I'm going to stop right now. I'm going to go back to, like I said, the most recent fight he had. And in that, if you remember, it was quite, stressful, because we were like, oh my God, somebody sent some bananas to his room. What? Right? And I'm watching him. And he's not doing all of the shouting. Even in the conversation, as he expressed, his frustration with the bananas and stuff, or what am I can't remember. It was something that was sent to his room. Whatever it was clearly racist, and it wasn't cool at all, right? But what I watched was his tone, his rate, none of the way he spoke. His speech was not pressured at all. The fluency, I would actually say, was within normal limits, is what we call it, right? I watched how he engaged with others. And like I said, this was something that he expressed, being upset, disheartened with, angry with, all of these emotions he expressed. Yet you're not presenting the same. So let's bounce back again, right? Remember, I was talking about, what if there was something that was already leading up to? Well, in that previous fight, there was a triggering event. There was something that could have easily led for him to be outside of that window of tolerance, right? Because we all have a window of tolerance, meaning that it's not but so much that we can take before our window closes and we begin to act from the emotional mind versus the wise mind. All right. So we get back to the current presser. We're going to fast forward and go to, where the weigh-in was. And I'm just observing, and I watched Keyshawn come to step on the scale. And, Bo Mac is kind of peeping over and looking. And they say, that whatever the weight was, I can't remember right off, bottom line, he was 4 pounds and something over. And you hear Bo Mac just say, damn, he kind of, because Bo Max really was, I kept watching that. He seemed to be focused on that scale, and he just was like, damn. And then I get back to Keyshawn. And then it was time for the face-off. What I observed at that moment was like the brain was going. Like, you ever been in a situation and people are talking to you and all of this is happening around you, I just imagine, and what I could hear is people, Keyshawn, Keyshawn. And it sounds so far away because the racing thoughts are just going. And it was quite obvious. If any of you, especially after this discussion, care to go back and try to see if you can see some of these things, that would be pretty cool, if y'all do have a moment to go back and look at it just from a different perspective as well. But I noticed there was a difference. I then saw more of physical movements that he was not exhibiting previously. So if you remember when the young lady was asking him, hey, do you want to, are you going to go back and try to get this weight down within this hour, blah, blah, blah. You got another hour before you can weigh in, whatever, she said. And as he spoke, he started scratching his head. And he was doing all of these things. And I'm just watching. And then, that's when he said that, he had a hard time previously, with the weight, but he made it. And, in the other fight. And then he goes back to scratching and he's looking all around. And I'm just watching. And so then I cut everything off. Because sometimes, and like I said, I don't make a blanketed statement for all clinicians like myself. But after I have observed, after I've had that first initial contact, after I have documented what's been observed, right? After I've asked some open-ended questions, right? Then I go back to my desk and I sit down and I kind of look through everything. Because now I'm trying to see if the math is mathing. What could have possibly led to this, So my question is, could something have potentially happened that caused the stress? Could it have been pressure? Could it have been the tension that was already there between him and that other boxer? Right now, I just can't even think of his name. It's the one that his brother fought, the one that they stepped to in the locker room or in his dressing room, whatever. But I know that there was discussions about previous tension being there. We've discussed in past videos that when we begin to ruminate on certain emotions, these negative emotions, they begin to intensify. Well, if we don't check that thing, oh my gosh, it can send us into a whole nother thing because we're going to be much more likely to be reactive, meaning we're acting out of that emotional mind versus wise mind versus being able to maintain some sense of balance, if you will. And so, no, I don't know for certain. I can only base it off of what, like I said, I saw on the television. And it definitely presented as someone who had potentially experienced a moment where they were in that fight, flight, freeze response, that survival mode, right? We all have experienced that. I don't care if it's a dog that, you walk in your neighborhood and you see a dog coming, man, within seconds, it's amazing what the body can do when there is a perceived threat. Stress, stress can bring it upon all of these things. So, like I said, that fight, flight, freeze response. So what first happens, obviously, is, the first connection that's going to be made is that amygdala, right? And that thing's sending the signals and all of that to that hypothalamus. And before you know it, that nervous system is just having a total glitch. I mean, it goes haywire, which is why at times when someone is in that state, because you can't control it consciously, it comes out in these behaviors. Even if one tries to suppress and act as if Oh no, I was just chilling. I was this, I was that. It may leak in ways of speech and interactions, if you will. What I observed is that Keyshawn was in that fight mode. The stress, pressure, um, could have been possibly disappointment. I don't know. I'm not him. I'm not any mind reader. I don't know. But it was quite obvious that we were more in that emotional state. That emotional state is what causes us to make decisions without any processing prior to. We are just reacting. Something happens, we respond. No matter what it looks like, we're just going to respond. Right? So then we get to that unspoken. Just as where we are now. And I see more of a flight response. Because surely I would assume that this entire ordeal could have caused a significant amount of distress. And we just avoid. Sometimes when one is in flight, like we talked about, walking through a neighborhood, seeing that mean ass dog, and you like, nope, I ain't doing it today. You running. That's that type of flight, right? Physical. You running. You getting away out of danger, perceived threat. You're getting away from it. Or you could go into avoidance behavior. Because in that moment, it is much safer to avoid because it helps us cope better with that feeling of discomfort, that feeling of distress, right? It makes it easier to manage. Not the most healthiest thing. And if, it comes to that and you need to do that, then so be it. Just don't stay there long, right? That's what I always say. Just don't stay there long. There's a lot of moments where our fight, flight, or freeze response have proven to be our protector part. You heard me talk about parts early on, and we'll explore that one day. But it was just interesting to see the Keyshawn that showed up, the part of Keyshawn that showed up to this presser and upcoming fight that he had versus the Keyshawn business part of himself that showed up in the previous fight. As always, I really look forward to hearing your feedback. Like I said, it's just from a different perspective. I'm the first to say that it's my perspective. I respect everyone's opinions and I enjoy hearing various perspectives. I learned so much just from our conversations. So I would enjoy if you do, just share what you observed, what you may agree with, what you may disagree with, and we can just have a conversation from there at some point or another. Um, I appreciate all of you who were able to take time to listen to this video. I appreciate the continued support. I appreciate those of you that have donated to the channel in showing support. Obviously, I told you before, I'm doing better. And so you will see ways that you can donate to the channel in the description box. But we shall see. I don't know how it's going to look in the future. I refuse to use the distortion of fortune telling. I don't know what it's going to look like, with Keyshawn. But nevertheless, I hope you all have a beautiful, blessed day. I hope that you continue to allow yourselves to just be present. Life, man, if you get too caught up, that thing start passing you by, and you miss really important moments because we're thinking about the next thing. Be gentle with yourselves. Be present in those moments. We're all doing this thing called life for the very first time. Even Keyshawn. Y'all have a beautiful day. See you next time.